Hello and blessings to you. In this video, we'll cover chapter 18 in the first Hebrew primer, which is the participle. First, I wanted to go over a couple of these oral reviews again. So let's get started with that. Vayehi ba'et hahi basar rav b'Yerushalayim. Okay, and that is, and there was. Notice that this is imperfect, but because of our vav, we'll change it to perfect. There was in that time, literally in the time, that one. So, and there was in that time flesh or meat, much. So much flesh in Jerusalem. Haya ba'et hahi basar rav b'Yerushalayim. So again, this is there was in the time that one, so in that time, much flesh in Jerusalem. Okay. Number 2, Va'ahavta et pnei David va'et kesef Avraham. So, and you will love, because of our vav here, we'll change it to imperfect, and you will love the face of David and the silver of Abraham. Okay? Ahavta et pnei David va'et kesef Avraham. So you loved the face of David and the silver of Abraham. Okay, hopefully that's some good review from chapter 17, especially noticing how these verbs, despite being the same spelling, the same form, because of this vav, this one is imperfect even though it looks just like the perfect. Okay, and again that's the vav conversive or the reversing vav, whatever you want to call that. You'll see it both ways. All right, well let's go through our vocabulary next. First we have Evan, Avanim, Evan, Avne, which means stone. This word is used in the name Ebenezer. So Evan means stone, Ezer means helper. So like in the Genesis narrative, the man and the woman are Ezer Kenegdos, helper as partners. So I don't know if that'll help you with this, but so maybe think Ebenezer Scrooge, or Ebenezer the Lord is my helper is kind of what we translate that as, but literally an Ebenezer is a stone helper. So Eben, stone. Next we have Aharon, which just means Aaron. When you sound that out, it should be pretty obvious. Then we have Beit Nun Hey, or Bana, which is our verb build. So Bana would be he built. Goy, Goyim, means a people, nation. So it's a synonym of our word people, nation. This is just another way of saying it. And actually, at least in modern Jewish kind of flavored books that I've read, they talk about Gentiles or foreigners as goyim, the nations. So hopefully that helps some of you. Next we have our verb yod resh dalet, or yarad, means go down or descend. You might think about it as the opposite of Allah, to go up or ascend. So Allah versus yarad. Okay. Then we have ka'asher, means when or as. I think we've had that in some of our tall tales or guided reading. Next we have machane, machnot, machane, machnot, which would be camp. So this is the word when Jacob divides his family into two camps before he sees Esau. Machane. We have mate, matot, mate, matot, which is the word for tribe. It's actually also the word for staff or rod. In this book, the author will only use it as tribe, but when you encounter it in the Bible, it can also be staff or rod. So something to keep in mind there. Ma'aseh, ma'asim, ma'aseh, ma'aseh is deed. And you can see we actually have our noun, ayin, sin, hey, asa, to do or to make. So this is something that is done or made. So we might say in English a deed, something you've accomplished, I guess. Then we have the verb nun.tav.nun. Natan means give or set. This is where we get our name Nathan or Nathaniel. Nathaniel would literally mean God gives, or I guess technically God gave in the perfect. Okay, so Natan, nun, tav, nun. This is actually a very irregular verb because it has two nuns. And if you remember, nun is one of our weak letters. So nun is will drop out whenever it can. If it gets next to other letters, it will often drop out and become a dagesh in that letter. And I think we'll see some examples of that later in this chapter. But so this is doubly weak because it's at the beginning and the end. So we'll kind of see how that works out later. Next we have tzaddik, tzaddikah, tzaddikim, tzaddikot. So you can tell from these four forms that obviously this is an adjective. Okay, we have the masculine singular, masculine plural, feminine plural. And this is the word for righteous or just, tzaddik. Okay, then we have Rivka as our word for Rebecca. Then we have regel, regalim, regel, ragle, and that's our word for foot or leg. So notice in Hebrew there's not such a distinction as we have, even toes and toenails and stuff like that, foot and leg. And in the same way, I think you've already had yad as hand, but yad could also be arm. So kind of different than English, huh? Then we have our verb shin, tav, hey. Shata means to drink. And this is kind of a stretch, but how I first remembered this is by that old drink Shasta. Comes in different flavors, I think. It's not super helpful because you might think there's that S there, but maybe it will help some of you. Okay. Now, it should be apparent that since these are third hey verbs, they're going to follow the same pattern as other third hey verbs. And if you want to have a bit of a refresher on third hey verbs, you can go back to chapter 8. Okay, so in chapter 8 is when we first covered third hey verbs. So bana and shata will both follow that kind of irregular paradigm. All right. Let's see if I want to talk about anything else. Apparently, tzaddik is very rarely used in the Bible with feminine forms, mostly just masculine. In this book, we'll be using it with feminine forms as well, just for practice, but I guess just be prepared that it's mostly masculine in the Bible. Okay, so now let's get to what this chapter is mainly about. Okay, and that is the participle. So a participle in English is a kind of verbal idea ending, well, that was not good writing. It's a verbal idea that ends in ing. It is so hard to write with a mouse. Okay, but for instance, if we have the word hearing, okay, so hearing is a verbal idea because we have the verb hear with an ing at the end. Okay, so this is a good English example of that. I'm going to erase it because it's hideous. But, so in Hebrew, we can use this kind of verbal idea as an adjective, a noun, or still as a verb. Okay? One thing about participles that's different from other verbs is that there is no person inherent to a participle. Okay, so it's not going to be first, second, or third. Okay, it will still indicate number and gender, and if it's functioning as a noun or an adjective, it could also have the definite article on it. And if it's an adjective, then that article has to match whatever it is modifying. So if the noun is definite, then this participle adjective will also be definite, and if not, it won't. Okay. So out of this, though, remember number and gender. Okay. So number and gender. That is all that a participle really has. Okay. Now further, though, there is an active participle and a passive participle. So I shouldn't have erased this, so let me poorly write this again. So in English, if I would say hearing, this is a active participle. Okay. Active means that the subject is the one who actuates the verb or acts out the verb. Okay, so that's an active participle. A passive means that the subject is actually the object of the verb. So if I say something like, I was heard, heard would be a passive way of saying this. Okay, so let's kind of look at what this looks like in Hebrew. So first, we are going to just talk about the active participle. So the distinguishing feature of an active participle in Hebrew is this O class sound, either a holem vav or just a holem, between the first and second root letters. Okay? So if we have 3 root letters, right here we might have this holem, or even a holem vav. And that is what signifies that this is going to be a participle. So let's kind of look at some examples of this. So here we have the verb shamar, to guard. So as a participle, we might have it guarding as kind of a verbal participle, or guardian as a noun. Well, so we'll talk about options for translation later. Right now, let's just kind of keep looking at the form. Okay? So it can be either of these, and they can be interchangeable. So in different places, you might see the same word with one or the other. So here's kind of breaking that down. And they're both pronounced the same way. Okay. So here we have shomer, shomeret, shomrim, and shomrot. Now notice that O class vowel between the first and second root letters in each of those forms. Okay, that's what tips you off it's a participle, an active participle. So let's see. Author wants to point out there could be some variations in the spellings, especially the vowels of the forms, except that O class vowel will always remain the same. It will always be there between the first and second root letters. Okay, so let's take a look at some of our other words. So here we have shomea, shomeat, shomeim, shomeot. Okay, and notice that these are the four kind of forms you can get from having a different number, singular or plural, and gender, masculine or feminine. Okay, because that's all that's really going on in a given participle that you can kind of decline is how we might talk about that. Okay, so let's look at the next word. So here's Resh Aleph Hey. We have roe, roa, roim, root. Yod Sade Aleph, we have Yotze, Yotzeit, Yotzim, Yotzot. Okay, in the next few sections, we're going to kind of break down the different ways we can use a participle. Okay, so remember that's as a verb, as an adjective, and as a noun. Okay, now an active participle as a verb will generally have that ing kind of sense to it. Okay. So when we are using a participle as a verb, a lot of times, so again, not always, and we'll refer to our favorite word about this, it's going to be context, okay? Not always, but it is able to be used in the present tense, okay? So just kind of like our noun sentences, or some of our particles, like the particle of existence, we can use it in the present. Whereas with other verbs, because they're either in the perfect or imperfect, they will generally just be in the past or in the future. Okay? So this is one of the few ways in which we can really make a present sort of idea. Okay? So, for instance, well, I guess first they wanted to remind you about noun sentences. Okay, so hu ba'aretzo, so he is, you have to imagine that is, in his land. He is in his land. Okay? Now, when we use a participle in the present, we might be able to use it as like a present continuous sort of action. So maybe he is hearing, or something like that would work. But it could also kind of have a past sort of sense or future sort of sense to it as well. So he was hearing, he will be hearing, something along those lines could also work. So here's some examples of this. So hu yoshev. So notice here there's kind of something going on as well. If you remember from earlier in our textbook, whenever we have a sheen here, sometimes a holum will kind of get absorbed into that mark that distinguishes the sheen from the seen. Okay, so there is a holum here, yoshev. So hu yoshev ba'aretzo. He literally just maybe residing in his land. He residing in his land. So we might say he is residing in his land. And then we also have those other options. He was residing in his land. He will be residing in his land. He continues residing in his land. So those are all options that the author presents to us. Next example, Moshe. Actually, notice again we have that hulam being absorbed into the sheen. Moshe shomea et kolo. So Moses is hearing his voice. Okay. Now we can add our verb heyot hey, the to be verb, to give more of a tense to this, either in the past or the future. Well, rather in the perfect or imperfect, really. and that will allow us to kind of fix that into a time frame. Okay, now without it, obviously there is no time frame with this. There's no necessary time frame in a participle. And that's why we have that flexibility where we can translate it in the present, we can translate it in the past or the future as well, because there's no real time frame to a participle like that. So if we want a time frame, and really rather it's if the author wants and we're translating it, we can do that by adding hey yod hey. So here we have hu haya yoshev ba'eretzot. So he was residing in his land. Hem hayu yoshvim ba'aretzo. They were residing in his land. Notice in English, we'll translate both of these just as residing, but they have different forms because they are matching other things in the sentence. So here the subject is singular masculine, so our participle is singular masculine. Here it is plural masculine, so our participle is plural masculine. Okay. And I guess that's what this next section is about. Because a participle is a verb, like other verbs, it still does have to match the noun in number and gender. Okay, so we could not have this participle in this sentence. It wouldn't make any sense in Hebrew. So here, as an example of that, we have hu yoshev ba'eretzo. He is residing in his land. Hu yoshevet ba'eretzo. She is residing in his land. Okay. So that's a participle functioning as a verb. The next is as an adjective. So you can have a participle acting as adjectives, and they will match the noun they modify in number and gender. Okay, so here's an example of just a regular adjective. Ha'anashim hatovim. So the men, the good ones, so the good men. Ha'anashim ha'yoshavim. So the men, the residing ones. So the residing men or the sitting men. Something like that. And notice it matches in number and gender, but also with the article in definiteness. Okay? Habat hatova. So the daughter, the good one, the good daughter. Habat ha-yoshevet. So the daughter, the sitting one. Notice you can insert things like who is sitting. Now, it's not literally there, okay, but in English, as kind of a translation equivalence sort of thing, you can add stuff like this. It's just not super literal. So the daughter who is sitting, or the sitting daughter, both of those kind of work. And then, of course, if the noun is indefinite and the participle is acting as an adjective, then the participle will also be indefinite. So here is that example with a regular adjective, ish tov, a man, a good one, a good man. And then here it is as a participle, ish yoshev, so a man, a sitting one, a sitting man. Okay. Well, I feel like I've already covered this, so let's just kind of skip this section. Feel free to read through it. Okay. But again, it's just saying that if it's definite, the participle will also be definite. When a participle is used as an adjective, this author suggests that we can translate it with who. So what I just said up here a little bit. Not very literal. This author seems to prefer that, but you could really do either of these. The man who is sitting or the sitting man, both of those work. So I guess that's up to your preference. Okay, last, the participle in Hebrew can also function as a noun. Okay, in English, when this happens, we call it a gerund. So if I said something like, swimming is my favorite sport, swimming is a gerund there. It's a verbal idea used as a noun. That's a gerund. Okay, so in Hebrew, when this happens, well, Hebrew, this can happen as well, is what I should say. And when it does, though, it can be made definite, just like a regular noun, and it can also function in word pairs, like any other noun. Okay, so here's some examples. Bane, sun. Ose, notice both of those forms work. Literally might be something like a making one, so one who makes, something along those lines. But then we can also go one step into more functional English and just say maker. So maybe we're talking about the Lord being the maker of heaven and earth, the making one of heaven and earth. Okay. Next, it can also be definite. So here we have ha-bane, so the son, ha-ose, the making one, the maker. Ben shalom, so here's a word pair, a son of peace. Ose shalom, a maker of peace. One who makes peace, a peacemaker, we might even say. Next we have B'nai Shalom, so this is a plural word pair, so sons of peace. Ose Shalom, makers of peace, peacemakers even. Notice when this happens that this does, because this is a word pair, it does take that word pair masculine plural ending instead of osim, we might expect. Instead we have ose, shalom. Okay. Bincha, so this is showing it with possessive endings. Your son. Oseka, your maker. So when a participle is functioning as a noun, it behaves just like other nouns can behave, is basically what this whole section is about, which is not very surprising. Okay, now there are certain participles that are used so frequently and have kind of become ingrained in such a way that they have become a word all by themselves. So here we have Yoshev could literally just be a residing one or the one who resides, something along those lines. But because that is used so frequently, here we have an English word that's just equivalent, a resident. Okay, same thing, shomer. So we have a guarding one, one who guards, something along those lines. But with a lot of strong usage, then it becomes a guard or a guardian. Either of those could work. So one who guards is a guard. So makes sense, right? Shofet then also technically is one who judges or a judging one. And so that's a judge. Okay. So far, all of this has been the active participle. Okay, and as a reminder of earlier, the active participle has that O class vowel between the second and third root letters. I'm sorry, the first and second root letters. I was putting it in the right place, but saying the wrong thing. Okay, so as this O class vowel. Next thing we're going to talk about is the passive participle, which will take a U class vowel between the second and third root letters. Okay, so definitely notice the differences between here. This is first and second, this is second and third, this is an O class vowel, this is a U class vowel. Okay, so it shouldn't be too hard to distinguish between an active and passive participle. All right. And actually, here we go. We're going to jump right in and look at some comparisons between the same word as both active and passive. Okay. So here we have hu sholeach et ha-malach. Okay. So he is sending the messenger. Okay. Ha-malach shaluach. So notice in this word there is a furtive patak here, so that patak will be pronounced before the chet. And that's not so much to do with passive participles as much as it is just with this verb. Okay. So here we have the messenger is sent. Okay. Sent. The messenger is the object of the action. So that's the key to a passive participle. So on this hand we have sending, here we have sent. Notice though this is not the messenger sent a message, so that's kind of confusing in English how our passive verbal idea for this verb is the same as a past one, a past active one. So that's confusing in English. So maybe we, instead of delving into this, we should just jump to another example. Don't be confused by that, I guess is what I'm trying to point out. Next example, Haim kotvim davar. So Haim kotvim davar. So they are writing a word. Okay? Hadavar katuv. The word is written. So here again we have our active participle and our passive. So the word is the object of the verb, this participle. So it's passive. Okay. Next one. So this was our kind of verbal ideas. Next is our adjectival ideas. A man who is sending would be ish sholeach. Oh, that's just the same word. Okay. So ish sholeach. A man who is sending, or a sending man, something like that. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense without other context. So then we have malach shaluach. Okay, a messenger is sent. So a sent messenger. Okay. Notice sholeach, shaluach. So here's that O, here's that U. Ha'ish hakotev, sorry, ha'ish hakotev. So the writing man, or the man, the writing one. And then we have hadavar hakatuv. The word, the written one, the written word. Finally, as a noun, we have hasholeach, the sender, the sending one. And again, to know whether it's a verb, adjective, or noun is by context. Okay, because if you notice, sholeach is the same as appear, sholeach, or here as well. The big difference here would be this article. That might be a good tip-off, but the adjective can also take an article if it was the man, the sending one. So it's by context that we'll know what kind of, how the participle is functioning. Okay. So here we have hashaluach, the one who is sent. Okay. So this is not the same as the recipient. This is not the one who receives. We have the sender and whatever is sent. So perhaps this is someone that is mailing something, and this is the letter. Okay. Last example, hakotev is the writer, the one who writes, the writing one. And hakatuv is the written one which is written, or the thing which is written. Hakatuv. And then just kind of a fun note here at the bottom. Baruch is a passive participle. You know that because of this shurek here. Is a passive participle for the verb barak, which means, well, so Baruch means blessed because it's passive. Barak would be something like he blessed. So again, notice in English with that word, our passive participle takes the same form as the past verb, which is not super helpful in English when we're trying to distinguish these. But in Hebrew, they're all very distinct, so that's good. Okay. So just kind of going through this, looks like we've already talked about this section. We'll go over it again just quickly. So again, with the passive participle, a U class vowel is between the second and third root letter. Now typically this will be a shurek, okay, but it could also take the form of a kibbutz. Okay, so technically you could see any of these out in the wild of actually translating from the Bible, but the shurek will be much more common. Still, because you can see either, it's better to think of this just as a U class vowel between the second and third roots. Okay, so here we have katuv, katuva, katuvim, katuvot. Okay, so again, these can be verbs, adjectives, or nouns. And a good example actually is ketuvim is the third kind of section of the Hebrew Bible. So first we have the Torah, which as you know means law. Then we have the Navim. You should know Navi means prophet, so Navim is prophets. And then we have the Ketuvim. I don't know why I'm spelling these in English. I really should have gone for Hebrew, shouldn't I have? But, as I was talking, I wasn't paying attention to what I was writing. Well, anyways, though, so these are the three sections of the Hebrew Bible, and a lot of times you might even see these first three letters then taken out to describe the Hebrew Bible as a name as Tanakh. So a Tanakh is a Hebrew Bible that is probably a Jewish Hebrew Bible, and it's organized, and it could be an English translation even, I guess. But I think the major difference is how it's organized with the Torah, the Navim, and then the Ketuvim. And I say all that just to tell you, Ketuvim, as you know now, would be the written things. In English, we typically just say the writings. Writings being something that is written, right? So maybe that will help you out. At the very least, I find it interesting, and I hope you find that interesting. So let's kind of keep moving, though. So not every verb has a past participle, and some are used so rarely that this book isn't going to really teach them. I think the major thing I would like you to do is to be able to memorize both the passive and the active forms. So down there on page 185, and then up here on page 181. So memorize those for sure, or at the very least just be able to recognize them by differentiating between this, and then realize it's just kind of the same as adjectival endings at that point. with the Comet's Hey, the Hirik Yod Mem, and the Holam Vav Tav. So I don't need you to memorize specific forms like this. Just more memorize the pattern and then be familiar between the passive and active participles. Okay? Still, here's some examples. So here we have our verb aleph hey bet. So ahuv is someone who is loved, one who is loved. Kaf tav bet is going to be katuv, written. So that's what we talked about up here. Katuvim, the written things, the writings. Nun.tav.nun, natun. Okay, so something that is given, or the given one, depending on context, we'll know more about it. Ayin sin hey is asu, something that is made, as opposed to osa, a maker. Pei tav chet, patuach. So notice we have a furtive patak here as well. And that is opened, so maybe the opened door or the opened jar. Shaluach, again we have a furtive patak here. The sent one, the sent thing. So these are pretty common passive participles, is what the author is trying to point out. And okay, so pointing out why we have a furtive patak here and why the hey drops out and we have a yod here instead is because they're guttural letters, and so just some minor changes take place because of that. So we're not going to go into why those changes happen unless one of you is curious, and you can contact me and I'll get into stuff like that with you. But for now, I don't need you to memorize any of these changes. Really, the important thing is this U class vowel here. Shaluach. Okay. The author also says that you might be able to translate it is in front of a passive participle, and that could help you kind of deal with it in English. So we have katuv batorah, it is written in the Torah, or kakatuv, as it is written, asu kasef, it is made of silver. I think it is important for you to realize, though, that that is not literally what is happening here. We don't have an it. Now, if we had an it, we could imply the is with like a noun sentence sort of thing, but there's not really an it here. Literally, this is written in the Torah as, maybe you could say as is written, and then made of silver. So I guess as long as you're aware that this is literally what it says, then maybe it's okay to add the it is. Okay, let's see. I'm just trying to skim through this really fast. I think we have talked about this well enough that we don't need to keep going over it, but Holam and Holam Vav are interchangeable because of the development of the Hebrew language and then how the Masoretes came back and added the vowels. Before they did that, we had vowel letters, if you remember all of that from the second or third class session. We talked about that. But for now, we're not going to dive into that. Here's just some examples to wrap up participles, and then the last thing we'll do is we'll talk about the noun natan. Okay, so Hamelech shofet et amo. So the king is judging his people. Okay, so this is a participle being used as a verb, and in this case maybe even a present continuous verb. So there's present action going on here. So the king is currently judging his people. So the king is judging his people. Here we have Hamelech HaShofet Yashav Ba'aretz. So this is the king, the judging one, lived in the land or dwelt in the land. So we might even fix this a little more and say the judging king lived in the land. Hashofet yeshav ba'aretz. So this is just the judge lived in the land, resided in the land. Shoftei Yisrael yashvu ba'aretz. So this is the judges of Israel. So this is being used as a noun sentence. Okay, the judges of Israel dwelt in the land. And finally, hadavar hazeh katuv. The word, this one, is written. So this word is written. Okay. Finally, we'll talk about our verb natan. So if you remember, nun is one of our weak letters, and there are two nuns here, which means that this is actually a doubly weak verb, natan. So in the perfect tense, this final nun drops out, becomes this dagesh right here in this tav, and we get natati. Okay, instead of natanti, we have natati. Natata, natat, natan, natna, natnu, and notice that the nun still dropped out here. This is our nun from our ending, our first common plural ending. This is not the nun that is originally in the verb. And it drops out and becomes the dagesh here. Kind of the grammatical way of talking about this is that it assimilates into the dagesh of this next letter. So, natanu, natatem, nataten, natnu. Okay. So just some irregular stuff going on with this. I don't need you to necessarily memorize this. If you want to, by all means, go ahead. More, just be aware in the perfect that the second nun will almost always drop out. I mean, you can see there are three forms here where it's still there. And this dagesh will be a giveaway, because that dagesh won't usually be there. Okay. Well, in the perfect, we actually have kind of the opposite problem. Actually, we have the double problem in some forms like this one. We'll get there in a second, though. In the imperfect, it's actually the first nun that drops out, because in the imperfect, we add signal letters to the beginning rather than to the end. Okay, so here we have etain, tetain, titni, yetain, tetain. So notice, again, that the nun is assimilating into this tav here in the middle as the dagesh. So it does drop out, but it's technically still there, and that's what the dagesh represents. Then we have nitain. So notice, although this is a nun, again, this is not the nun that's part of the original verb. This is the nun that is the signal letter for the first common plural imperfect. So nitain. Titnu, titenu, titena, and on this on this form of the verb, both nuns have dropped out. Our first one has become this dagesh, and our second one has become this dagesh. So technically, all that we have left of the original verb is this tav right here in the middle. Okay, so this can definitely be confusing. Now, what will help, if you approach this, you can kind of remove the letters at the end, remove the letters at the beginning, because this should still be kind of obvious that this is a imperfect verb, okay, with either a 2FP or 3FP form. Okay, remember those are the same form. Because of this na ending, that should be kind of a good giveaway. And when you see that, you can take off the na and you can take off the t at the beginning. And then when you do that, you're only left with one letter. Now when you're left with the one letter, you realize, okay, two of my root letters have dropped out. Which two are they? Do I know any verbs that are like this? And at that point, you can, I guess, just generally start looking for a verb with a tav. More specifically, though, we know the tav is in the second position because of how these dageshes indicate where it was dropped off from, right? So, eventually, hopefully, you'll remember that you know this word natan, and both nuns are weak and can drop out. I know, it's not very exciting, but still, I think it's fun. It's kind of like a puzzle sort of thing, seeing what you can drop off and then seeing what you're left with and what options you have after that. So, luckily though for us, as a participle, which natan is frequently used as a participle, it's completely regular. So we have notain, notena, or sorry, notenet, note, notenim, note, that's funny, note, natun, natuna, natunim, natunot. Okay, so all of the nuns are there, nothing drops out, which is positive. Well, that's it for this video. Keep studying your vocab, and if you have any questions, by all means ask them in class. Blessings to you.